The phone buzzes at 6:03 a.m., cutting through the silence of Richard Pemberton's $60 million penthouse like a death sentence. His hands shake as he stares at the screen. 847,000 views. The number climbs as he watches, each digit another nail in his coffin. The video title makes his blood freeze. Racist billionaire gets destroyed by cook he tried to humiliate. His own voice echoes from the phone speaker, slurred with expensive whiskey and cheap arrogance. If you can dance this salsa better than my wife, I'll marry you. The comments section burns with fury. His business partners won't stop calling. The board wants him out. His wife won't speak to him. His empire, built over 30 years, crumbles in real time. How did it come to this? How did one stupid, drunken bet destroy everything he'd worked for? How did a woman in a uniform bring down a man who owned half of Manhattan? 24 hours earlier, the Pemberton penthouse gleamed like a fortress of wealth. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's annual salaries cast rainbows across marble floors imported from Italian quarries. Tonight's engagement party for David Pemberton would cost $200,000. Pocket change for Manhattan's elite, but more than most families see in 4 years. The guest list read like a who's who of American aristocracy. Senators, CEOs, oil heiresses, tech moguls, old money families whose names graced museum wings and university buildings. Tonight, they would celebrate David's engagement to Victoria Ashworth, merging two family fortunes worth over $3 billion. In the kitchen, Sophia Rivera moved with quiet grace, preparing canapés for 200 guests. Her uniform was spotless, her movements precise, her presence carefully invisible. She'd been cooking for the Pemberton family for 3 months now, ever since her previous employer decided she was too ethnic for their Park Avenue dinner parties. The pay was decent, the work honest, the humiliation bearable. Behind her calm exterior, survival instincts hummed like electricity. 3 months of working for Manhattan's elite had taught her one fundamental truth: stay invisible, stay employed. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't remind them that you're human. The evening started perfectly. Champagne flowed like water. Conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes filled the air. Sophia weaved between the guests, refilling glasses, clearing plates, existing in that strange space where service workers live, essential but unseen, necessary but unwanted. Then it happened. A simple mistake that changed everything. Victoria Pemberton, already 3 glasses deep in Dom Perignon, stumbled slightly as Sophia approached with a tray of wine. The crystal glass slipped, red wine cascading across Victoria's white Chanel dress like blood on snow. The room fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the sound of breaking crystal against marble. Sophia knelt immediately, gathering the shards with trembling hands, whispering apologies that fell on deaf ears. Richard Pemberton's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Well. Our help seems to have coordination problems. His words carried the particular cruelty that only comes with absolute power and too much alcohol. The crowd sensed entertainment coming, phones emerging from designer purses and suit pockets like weapons preparing to capture whatever happened next. You know what? Richard continued, his voice rising with each word. I have an idea. Since you clearly can't handle simple tasks like carrying a tray, maybe we should test your other skills. Victoria, darling, show everyone that salsa routine from your dance class. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. How many times have you watched someone get humiliated and done nothing? How many times have you seen injustice and looked away? This story is happening right now. While you're watching this video, someone like Sophia is being judged by their uniform instead of their heart. Someone's talent is being dismissed because of their paycheck. Someone's dignity is being traded for someone else's entertainment. If this makes you angry, and it should, then prove it. Hit that like button like your conscience depends on it. Subscribe if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their background. Because staying silent while watching injustice, even in a story, is exactly how we got here. Victoria glided to the center of the room, her amateur salsa steps technically correct but completely soulless. The crowd applauded politely, not for her skill, but for her place in their world. Money bought applause just like everything else. Now, Richard announced, pointing at Sophia still kneeling among the crystal shards, let's see what $15 an hour buys us in talent. If you can dance this salsa better than my wife, I'll marry you. The crowd erupted in laughter. Phones rose like a firing squad, ready to capture what they assumed would be the most entertaining humiliation of the year. Someone started taking bets, all against the woman in the uniform. But what none of these wealthy elites knew, what their money and privilege had blinded them to, was that they were about to witness something that would destroy their comfortable world of assumptions. They had no idea that the quiet woman in the kitchen uniform was hiding a secret that would turn their night of cruel entertainment into their own public destruction. The secret Sophia Rivera had been carrying for 7 years. The truth that would make their laughter die in their throats and their certainty crumble like the crystal on the floor. This isn't just about dancing. This is about every person who's been underestimated because of their job, their appearance, their accent. It's about the cook who might be a poet, the janitor who might be an engineer, the server who might be your next inspiration. What happened next would humble them all, expose their cruelty to the world, and prove that sometimes the universe has perfect timing for delivering justice. And if stories like this one, tales of hidden strength and unexpected justice, resonate with your soul, make sure to comment "collection" below. I've been gathering these powerful narratives for my SoulThread family, stories that remind us that dignity can't be bought and respect can't be stolen. But standing there in her stained uniform, surrounded by laughter and judgment, nobody could see the truth about who Sophia Rivera really was. Nobody knew that 7 years ago, this same woman owned the world. 7 years ago, Sophia Rivera-Castillo commanded stages like a queen. Lincoln Center erupted in thunderous applause as she spun across the polished floor, her partner Miguel lifting her like she was made of starlight and dreams. The New York Times called her a force of nature in sequins. Vogue featured her on their cover. Sponsors lined up around the block, begging to attach their names to her magic. She was 27 years old and absolutely untouchable. The girl from the Bronx who danced her way to international fame, whose feet spoke languages that made grown men weep. Her apartment overlooked Central Park, 40 floors above the city that had raised her. Her bank account held 6 zeros. Her heart belonged completely to Miguel Santos, the man who spun her dreams into reality every single night on stage. They were America's sweethearts of salsa, the couple who proved that love and art could conquer anything. Magazine covers, television appearances, sold-out theaters from New York to Miami to Los Angeles. The world was theirs, and they danced through it like they owned every beat of music ever written. Miguel would lift her during their signature move, the one that made audiences gasp and photographers scramble for the perfect shot. For those suspended seconds, Sophia felt like she could fly. The future stretched ahead of them, golden and certain. Wedding plans, world tours, maybe their own dance academy someday. Everything was perfect. Everything was possible. March 15, 2017. The night that stole everything from her. They'd just signed a $1 million sponsorship deal with Coca-Cola earlier that day. The biggest contract of their careers, enough money to secure their future and fund their dreams. Miguel had been carrying the engagement ring in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came after their final bow at the Beacon Theater. 3 standing ovations, flowers raining down like confetti, the audience on their feet screaming for more. Backstage, with the adrenaline still singing through their veins, Miguel dropped to one knee. The champagne was still fizzing in their glasses when they climbed into the taxi. Sophia couldn't stop staring at the diamond on her finger, couldn't stop laughing with pure joy. They were invincible. They were in love. They had everything. The truck driver later said he never saw the red light. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was texting, maybe he was just careless with other people's dreams. The impact crushed the passenger side of the taxi like paper. Miguel died instantly. Sophia spent the next 6 months learning to walk again. Hospital machines beeping endlessly in sterile white rooms. Physical therapy that felt like torture. Miguel's funeral that she watched from a wheelchair, too broken to even cry properly. His family blamed her, as if loving him had somehow caused his death. The dance world moved on without them, finding new darlings, new stories, new dreams to sell. Miguel's visits became phone calls, then flowers, then nothing but silence and the slow, brutal realization that her world had ended with the sound of crushing metal. Sponsors disappeared like morning mist. Medical bills devoured her savings with the hunger of wild animals. The apartment overlooking Central Park went first, then the car, then the jewelry, then everything that proved she'd ever been anything more than a broken woman learning to walk on legs that remembered how to fly. Stop for a second. When was the last time you had to start over completely? When everything you worked for, everything you were proud of, just vanished. When the person you planned to grow old with was suddenly a memory, and the body you trusted completely became a stranger. Sophia could have asked her family for help. Her mother called every day, begging her to come home to the Bronx, to let them take care of her. She could have played the victim card, started a GoFundMe, written a memoir about tragedy and loss. But she chose dignity over charity, self-respect over sympathy. How many of us would make that same choice? If you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing, comment, rebuild. If you admire people who choose pride over pity, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to show you what real strength looks like. 3 years of slow healing. 3 years of physical therapy that taught her to walk normally, but never to dance the same way. 3 years of watching the world forget that Sophia Rivera-Castillo had ever existed. The dance magazines stopped calling. The entertainment shows found new stories. The spotlight moved on, indifferent to the woman it left behind. She learned to cook out of necessity first, then discovered she had a gift for it. Food became her new language, another way to bring joy to people, even if they never knew her name. The pay was honest, the work steady, the anonymity almost a relief after years of living under constant scrutiny. But what her employers didn't know about their quiet cook, what the Pembertons and their wealthy friends couldn't see past her uniform, was that every Sunday morning in her tiny Queens apartment, Sophia still danced. Not the championship routines that once made audiences weep. Not the complex lifts and spins that required a partner she'd never have again. Just simple movements to Celia Cruz records, her body remembering what it meant to be alive, her heart holding onto the one piece of herself that the accident couldn't steal. The secret she practiced in her living room, with the curtains drawn and the music turned low so the neighbors wouldn't complain. The truth that her muscles still remembered every beat, every rhythm, every movement that had once made her famous. The fire that never died, just learned to burn quietly. This is the story of every artist who's been forced to survive instead of create. Every dancer waiting tables, every musician driving rideshare, every actor working retail. Talent doesn't pay rent. Dreams don't cover medical bills. But they never really die. They just wait, patient and hidden, for the right moment to remind the world that greatness doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. Standing there in the Pemberton penthouse, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than hired help, Sophia felt something stir that had been sleeping for years. Richard's cruel challenge wasn't just an insult. It was an invitation. A chance to show these people what they'd been too blind to see. The question wasn't whether she could dance. The question was whether she was ready to let the world remember who she really was. But Richard Pemberton wasn't finished. The laughter from his marriage joke only fed his hunger for more humiliation. He raised his whiskey glass like a conductor's baton, commanding the attention of every person in that gilded room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have entertainment." His words slurred with expensive whiskey and cheap cruelty. The crowd turned toward him like iron filings drawn to a magnet, sensing the kind of spectacle that would give them gossip for months. "Our help here thinks she can dance. Victoria, darling, show her how it's done." Victoria Pemberton glided to the center of the marble floor, her heels clicking with the confidence that only comes from a lifetime of never being told no. She'd been taking salsa lessons at an exclusive Manhattan studio for 6 months, the same way she collected other hobbies, expensive, temporary, and completely forgettable. The music started, and Victoria moved through her routine with the mechanical precision of someone who'd memorized steps but never felt the soul of the dance. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Turn, step, pose. Her movements were technically correct but completely lifeless, like watching a beautiful doll perform programmed motions. The crowd applauded politely, their clapping measured and proper. Not for her skill, because there wasn't much to admire, but for her place in their world. Money bought applause just like everything else. Victoria curtsied with a satisfied smile, basking in approval she hadn't earned. "Lovely, darling," Richard announced, loud enough to ensure his voice carried to every corner of the room. A perfect example of proper technique and breeding. His eyes found Sophia, still kneeling beside the crystal shards. "Now, let's see what $15 an hour buys us in talent." The cruelty in his voice made several guests uncomfortable. David Pemberton stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, this is enough. Leave her alone." Richard's laugh cut through his son's objection like acid. "Oh, but David, where's your sense of fun? Besides, she accepted the challenge. Didn't you, sweetheart?" He addressed Sophia with the kind of false sweetness that made her skin crawl. Phones emerged from purses and pockets like weapons drawn for battle. The guests sensed something worth recording, worth sharing, worth turning into their entertainment. Instagram stories began capturing everything. Someone in the back started a hashtag #helpdances. "I'll put $1,000 on the wife," called out Senator Morrison, his voice carrying the jovial cruelty of a man who'd never faced consequences for anything in his 70-year life. "Make it 5,000, laughed oil heiress Patricia Westfield. "This should be quick." The betting pool grew like wildfire. 10,000, 12,000, $15,000, all against the woman in the uniform. Money changed hands with casual indifference, as if they were wagering on a horse race instead of a human being's dignity. Sophia remained silent, her hands steady as she finished gathering the broken glass. But something had changed in her eyes. The resignation was gone, replaced by something these people couldn't recognize because they'd never needed it: genuine strength. "I want you to feel sick right now. I want your stomach to turn watching this cruelty. Because if you're not angry, you're not human. This is what systemic oppression looks like. Not just racism, not just classism, but the casual cruelty of people who think money makes them gods." Share this video. Not because it's entertaining, but because someone needs to see that this behavior has consequences. Subscribe if you believe that character matters more than checking accounts. Comment, "Justice," if you're tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. Richard wasn't finished escalating. The crowd's energy fed his sadistic pleasure, and he could feel the phones recording everything. This would be the story they told at dinner parties for years, the night they watched the help get put in her place. "Let's make this interesting," he announced, swirling his whiskey like he was conducting an orchestra of cruelty. "When you fail, and you will fail, you're not just fired. I'll personally make sure that no respectable family in Manhattan ever hires you again." The threat landed like a physical blow. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. They were witnesses now, complicit in whatever happened next. "You'll be blacklisted from every kitchen, every catering company, every restaurant worth working for in this city. I have friends everywhere, sweetheart. One phone call from me, and your little cooking career is over forever." Victoria's smile grew wider, feeding off her husband's power like a parasite. She'd never liked having staff around who made her feel inferior, and Sophia's quiet grace had always irritated her. This public destruction felt like justice for every moment she'd felt inadequate in comparison. David tried again. "Dad, this is crossing every line. Stop this now." "My son, the bleeding heart," Richard sneered. "Don't worry, David. This will be educational for everyone. Class is class, and some people need to be reminded of where they belong." Andre Williams, the building's head security, watched from his position by the kitchen entrance. Something about Sophia's stillness, her controlled breathing, her complete lack of panic, triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. He'd seen hundreds of people crack under pressure in his 20 years of security work. This woman wasn't cracking. She was preparing. The phones kept recording. The bets kept climbing. The cruelty kept escalating. But what none of these wealthy elites knew, what their money and privilege had blinded them to, was that they had just awakened something they couldn't control or buy their way out of. This is happening in boardrooms and restaurants and offices across America right now. Someone is being humiliated for someone else's entertainment. Someone's dignity is being traded for laughs. And usually, nobody stops it. Richard raised his glass one final time. "Choose your music, sweetheart. Make it good. It's the last dance you'll ever perform in polite society." But Sophia was already standing, brushing off her uniform with movements that suddenly seemed less like a servant and more like a warrior preparing for battle. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that made the room fall silent. "La Vida es un Carnaval" by Celia Cruz. Richard had no idea what he'd just awakened. He was about to learn that some challenges, once issued, can never be taken back. Sophia walked to the center of the marble floor like she was approaching an altar. Every eye in the room followed her movement, some with curiosity, most with cruel anticipation. She paused in the exact center, her feet finding the position her body had memorized years ago. Her hands moved to her hair tie with deliberate precision. The same ritual she'd performed before every competition, every performance, every moment when she needed to transform from Sophia the person into Sophia the champion. Pull the elastic tight. Shake out the tension from her shoulders. Lift her chin. Breathe deeply, feeling oxygen fill her lungs like preparation for battle. The crowd expected broken. They expected desperate. They expected a woman so beaten down by life that their laughter would finish what tragedy had started. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt their comfortable assumptions forever. "Look at her," Patricia Westfield whispered to her husband, loud enough for others to hear. "Already putting on airs. This should be amusing." Richard leaned against the marble bar, his whiskey glass catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. His smile held the satisfaction of a man who'd never doubted his own superiority, who'd built his identity on stepping on others to feel tall. But Andre Williams stepped closer to the performance area, something stirring in his memory. 23 years of working security at venues across Manhattan had exposed him to every kind of performer, every level of talent. Something about Sophia's posture, her controlled breathing, the way she moved through space with unconscious grace, triggered recognition he couldn't quite place. He watched her remove her shoes with movements that were too fluid for an amateur, too practiced for someone who just cooked for a living. The way she tested her balance on the marble floor, the subtle shift of weight from foot to foot, these weren't the actions of someone afraid of dancing. These were the preparations of someone who knew exactly what her body could do. Andre pulled out his phone, not to mock like the others, but because something told him this moment needed to be preserved. He positioned himself where he could capture everything, his security training making him the perfect witness to whatever was about to unfold. "I know who you are." Andre's voice was barely a whisper as he stepped close enough for only Sophia to hear. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in 3 years, someone looked at her and saw past the uniform, past the circumstances, past the carefully constructed invisibility she'd wrapped around herself like protection. Sophia Rivera-Castillo, World Champion, 2016. "I was security at Lincoln Center that night. You made the whole place weep with joy." Andre's words came out in a rush, as if he couldn't believe he'd solved the puzzle that had been nagging at him for months. "You're the dancer who disappeared after the accident." Sophia felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Someone remembered. Someone knew her truth. For 7 years, she'd lived as a ghost of herself, and now this man was saying her real name out loud. "Why are you doing this?" Andre asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "You don't need to prove anything to these people." Sophia looked around the room at the faces watching her with cruel anticipation, at Richard's smug satisfaction, at Victoria's entitled smirk, at the phones recording what they expected to be her humiliation. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that made Andre step back in respect. Because some people need to remember that respect isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn. She began untying her apron with movements that suddenly seemed less like a servant preparing to work and more like a warrior removing armor. And sometimes, when people forget that lesson, someone has to remind them. This moment right here, this is where heroes are made. Not in movie theaters or comic books, but in real moments when real people choose dignity over safety. When someone decides that standing up matters more than standing down. How many times have you had this moment? How many times have you chosen silence over courage? Don't judge Sophia's choice until you've faced your own. Subscribe if you want to see what courage looks like. Comment, courage, if you've ever had to choose between safety and self-respect. The sound system crackled to life, and Celia Cruz's powerful voice filled the penthouse with the opening notes of La Vida es un Carnaval. The song that had been her signature piece, the one that always made her feel connected to her grandmother's stories about dancing in Cuba, about music that could heal broken hearts and lift crushed spirits. Andre positioned his phone to capture the perfect angle, his instincts telling him that whatever happened next would matter beyond this room, beyond this night, beyond anything these wealthy people could comprehend. Sophia closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the music wash over her. In her mind, she could hear Miguel's voice from their rehearsals. "Feel the rhythm in your bones, mi amor. Let it tell your story." She could feel his presence, not as grief anymore, but as strength, as permission to be herself again. The crowd's chatter died as they realized she was actually going to go through with it. Some pulled out their phones to record, others made final bets, A few shifted uncomfortably as they began to sense that maybe this wouldn't be the easy entertainment they'd expected. Every performer knows this moment. The seconds before you reveal who you really are. The choice between playing small or showing up fully. The moment when hiding ends and truth begins. Sophia opened her eyes and began to move. Her first steps were deliberately awkward, her timing slightly off. She stumbled just enough to confirm their prejudices, letting them think they were seeing exactly what they expected, a desperate woman making a fool of herself for their amusement. The crowd relaxed back into their superiority. Richard's smile widened. Victoria giggled behind her manicured hand. The phones kept recording, capturing what they thought would be an embarrassing moment they could share with friends for years. But Andre noticed what the others missed. The stumbles were too controlled. The awkwardness too precise. This wasn't a woman failing at dancing. This was a master performer choosing exactly how much of herself to reveal, and when. What Sophia whispered to herself changed everything. For Miguel. For every person they've made feel small. For everyone watching who needs to remember their own worth. The percussion in the music built, and something shifted in Sophia's body language. The amateur facade began to crack, revealing glimpses of the professional underneath. Her hips found the rhythm with surgical precision. Her arms began to paint stories in the air. The laughter died first. Then the whispers. Then everything except Celia Cruz singing about life being beautiful despite the pain, and Sophia preparing to show 200 wealthy people what real power looked like. Andre kept recording, knowing he was about to witness something that would change everything for everyone in that room. The opening moves that had fooled everyone were about to transform into something none of them were prepared for. The first 16 beats were deliberately awkward. Sophia stumbled slightly, her timing off just enough to confirm every prejudice in that gilded room. Her movements looked clumsy, uncertain, exactly what 200 wealthy people expected from hired help pretending to be more than she was. The crowd relaxed into their comfortable superiority. Richard's smirk widened as he sipped his whiskey, already mentally composing the story he'd tell at his next board meeting. Victoria giggled behind her diamond bracelet, delighted to watch someone else fail so spectacularly. Phone screens glowed brighter as guests zoomed in to capture the embarrassment they were certain was coming. But Andre kept his phone steady, his security instincts telling him to wait, to watch, to be ready for something none of these people saw coming. Then the percussion hit. Sophia's body transformed like lightning striking calm water. The awkwardness vanished as if it had never existed, replaced by something so fluid and powerful that the marble floor seemed to bend beneath her feet. Her hips found the rhythm with surgical precision, moving in ways that made the music visible. Her arms painted stories in the air, each gesture flowing into the next with the kind of grace that can't be taught, only born. Her feet spoke fluent Spanish with the floor, every step a conversation with the beat that Celia Cruz had laid down decades ago. This wasn't the mechanical 1-2-3 that Victoria had performed. This was music made flesh, rhythm given life through a body that understood exactly what it was meant to do. The laughter died first, choking off in throats suddenly dry with shock. Then the whispers stopped, as if the very air had been sucked from the room. Then everything went silent except Celia Cruz singing about life being a carnival, and Sophia proving that some carnivals are absolutely revolutionary. Senator Morrison's betting smile froze on his face. Patricia Westfield's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. David Pemberton's eyes widened as he realized he was watching something extraordinary, something his father had accidentally unleashed through his own cruelty. This wasn't dancing. This was storytelling with a body that remembered excellence like a second heartbeat. Every spin spoke of stages conquered, of audiences rising to their feet in spontaneous worship. Every dip whispered of standing ovations that lasted so long theaters had to flash their lights to get people to leave. Every turn screamed of a woman who had never stopped being a champion, even when the world forgot her name and left her invisible. Sophia's technique was flawless, but technique was just the foundation. What made jaws drop and phones tremble in suddenly shaking hands was the soul she poured into every movement. This was 7 years of pain transformed into power, 3 years of silence exploding into song, a lifetime of dignity refusing to be broken by circumstances. Richard's face went white as expensive marble. The whiskey glass slipped from fingers gone suddenly numb, crystal shattering against the floor for the second time that night. He'd seen Victoria's amateur lessons at the country club. He'd witnessed corporate party performances by hired entertainers. This was different. This was professional. This was impossible. This was his complete and total humiliation broadcast live to 200 phones. Victoria's jaw dropped in slow motion, her perfect composure cracking like her husband's facade of superiority. She'd spent thousands of dollars on private lessons, convinced herself she was graceful, elegant, skilled. Watching Sophia move made her realize she'd been playing dress-up while a master had been serving her dinner. The phones kept recording, but the energy behind them had shifted completely. What started as weapons aimed at a victim had become witnesses to a miracle. Fingers that had been steady with cruel anticipation now shook with something approaching reverence. Andre's recording captured every second, every impossible movement, every moment when pretense met truth and shattered. His 23 years of security work had shown him fights, celebrations, disasters, and triumphs, but he'd never seen anything like this. He was watching a resurrection happen in real time. Sophia incorporated moves that belonged on world stages, not in penthouse living rooms. Advanced spins that required perfect balance and years of training. Floor work that demonstrated strength Victoria couldn't achieve with a personal trainer. Isolations that proved her body was an instrument tuned by masters of the craft. The crowd began to understand they weren't just watching someone dance. They were watching someone reclaim themselves, piece by piece, movement by movement, beat by beat. The quiet cook who'd been invisible for months was revealing herself to be someone they could never have imagined in their most expansive dreams. Stop. Pause right here. Look at that face, Richard's shock, his shame, the moment when arrogance meets reality and loses. This is justice. This is what happens when prejudice meets truth and gets completely destroyed. You're feeling something right now. That's not accident. That's your soul recognizing that talent doesn't care about your bank account, dignity doesn't come from your zip code, and respect is earned through character, not inherited through privilege. If your heart is racing, if you're cheering for her, if you want to share this moment with everyone you know, then do it. Subscribe like you mean it. Share this like someone's life depends on seeing it. Comment, Queen, if you know that true nobility comes from within. The music built toward its crescendo, and Sophia built with it. Her movements became more complex, more emotionally charged, more impossible to deny. She was no longer dancing for these people. She was dancing through them, past them, beyond them to something greater than their small, cruel world. Phone notifications began chiming as the first videos hit social media. Someone had started streaming live to Instagram. The hashtag #helpdances was already trending, but not in the way anyone had expected. Comments flooded in from viewers who recognized professional dancing when they saw it. Is that Sophia Rivera-Castillo? Oh my God, she's alive. This is the missing salsa champion. That man had no idea who he was challenging. Richard's phone buzzed with texts from business partners who were watching the live streams. His assistant was calling. His publicist was calling. The board chairman was calling. His world was crumbling in real time, one notification at a time, each buzz another crack in his empire. But Sophia wasn't finished. As the music reached its final crescendo, she executed a move that made the entire room gasp audibly. A combination spin and dip that required absolute trust in her own ability, the kind of risk that separated amateurs from professionals, pretenders from artists. When she straightened, frozen in perfect position as the last note faded, the silence stretched like a held breath. 200 people stared at a woman they dismissed, underestimated, and tried to humiliate, realizing they just witnessed something that would change how they saw the world forever. This is every underestimated person's dream moment. Every server who's actually an artist, every janitor who's actually an engineer, every person whose uniform hides their truth. This is what vindication looks like when it dances. Then Andre started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that recognized excellence when he saw it. David joined him, his face flushed with something that might have been pride or shame or both. One by one, others followed, until the penthouse filled with the sound of people who'd never expected to respect their hired help, discovering they had no choice. But the real performance was just beginning, because now everyone wanted to know who Sophia Rivera really was, and why Richard Pemberton looked like a man who'd just destroyed his own life in high definition. The silence stretched like a held breath before it exploded into applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping that had greeted Victoria's performance, but genuine, thunderous appreciation that shook the crystal chandeliers. 200 wealthy people who had never expected to respect their hired help found themselves on their feet, unable to deny what they'd just witnessed. But even as they clapped, their minds raced. This wasn't possible. The quiet woman who'd been refilling their wine glasses and clearing their plates for months couldn't be this skilled. People like her weren't supposed to possess this kind of talent, this level of artistry, this undeniable excellence. Richard Pemberton stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions like a broken slideshow: shock, denial, rage, and finally, desperate damage control. The whiskey that had made him feel invincible now made him stumble as he pushed through the crowd toward Sophia. "Well, that was entertaining," he managed, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Just a bit of fun, you understand. A joke between friends. Nobody actually expected." He trailed off as he realized every phone in the room was still recording, capturing his pathetic attempt to minimize what had just happened. But Andre Williams stepped forward before Richard could finish his cowardly backpedaling. 23 years of security work had taught him to recognize moments that mattered, and this was one that would change everything for everyone involved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding attention in crowded venues. "You've just witnessed a performance by Sophia Rivera-Castillo, former World Salsa Champion, Lincoln Center headliner, and one of the greatest dancers this city has ever produced." The gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. Phones immediately turned away from Richard and toward Sophia as guests frantically began Google searches, desperate to verify what they'd just heard. Within seconds, images filled their screens: Sophia in sequined gowns on prestigious stages, Sophia holding championship trophies, Sophia featured on magazine covers they remembered seeing years ago. "Oh my God," breathed Senator Morrison, staring at his phone screen. "She's the dancer who disappeared after that car accident. The one who was supposed to be the next big crossover star." "I remember now," whispered Patricia Westfield, her voice filled with something that might have been shame. "The Times did a whole feature on her comeback potential. Then she just vanished." David Pemberton stared at his father with an expression of complete disgust. His entire life, he'd watched Richard humiliate people for entertainment, but this crossed every line he'd ever imagined. His father hadn't just tried to embarrass an employee. He'd attempted to destroy a world-class artist who'd already survived more tragedy than most people could endure. "Well, Dad," David said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "You made a bet. In front of 200 witnesses. With multiple cameras recording." He pulled out his own phone, which had been capturing everything from his father's cruel challenge to Sophia's magnificent response. Richard's face went the color of old parchment. "David, don't be ridiculous. It was clearly just a promise," David interrupted. "You said if she could dance better than Victoria, you'd marry her. Well, there's no question she's the superior dancer. Everyone here can attest to that." The crowd murmured agreement, some nodding, others still staring at their phones as news of the evening's events began spreading across social media platforms. The hashtag Salsa Challenge was already trending, but not in the way anyone had expected. David stepped toward Sophia, his expression serious but respectful. "I would be honored to marry someone with your talent, your grace, and your character. But more than that, I'm ashamed of my family's behavior tonight. You deserve an apology from everyone in this room, starting with me." This moment right here, this is what integrity looks like when it's tested by family pressure. When someone chooses to do right even when it costs them everything. David could have stayed silent, could have supported his father's backtracking, could have chosen money over morality. How many times have you seen someone stand up to their own family when it mattered? How many times have you had to choose between loyalty and truth? Share this video if you believe in people who choose character over comfort. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up when it counts. Sophia looked around the room at faces that had transformed from mocking to amazed to ashamed. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet dignity that had sustained her through 7 years of rebuilding her life from nothing. "Thank you, David. Your offer honors me. But marriage should be about love, not bets made in cruelty." She turned to address the entire room, her presence commanding attention in a way that money never could. "This wasn't about proving I could dance. It was about remembering that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not judged by their circumstances." Her words landed like gentle blows to consciences that had been comfortable in their prejudices. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing how easily they'd participated in what they now understood was attempted character assassination. Victoria Pemberton stood apart from her husband, her face cycling between humiliation and something that might have been grudging respect. For months, she'd treated Sophia like furniture, useful but unworthy of real attention. Now she understood she'd been dismissing someone whose talent dwarfed her own amateur efforts by immeasurable degrees. But Richard wasn't finished. Desperation made him mean in the way that only comes from watching a lifetime of privilege crumble in real time. "This is ridiculous," he snarled, his carefully maintained facade completely gone. "So she can dance. So what? She's still just hired help who?" He stopped talking because the entire room had turned away from him. Not dramatically, not with obvious rejection, but with the subtle social distancing that Manhattan's elite used to exile someone from their circle. Conversations resumed, but Richard found himself alone in the center of his own party, surrounded by people who suddenly couldn't see him. Meanwhile, phones continued buzzing with notifications as the videos spread across every platform. The comments were brutal in their honesty. That man had no idea who he was messing with. This is what karma looks like in designer clothes. Sophia Rivera-Castillo is a queen. How dare he try to humiliate a world champion? The recognition that changed everything wasn't just about Sophia's identity being revealed. It was about 200 wealthy people realizing they'd been complicit in something they couldn't undo, couldn't take back, couldn't pretend hadn't happened. The phones had captured everything, and the internet never forgets. Andre continued recording, knowing he was documenting more than just one evening's entertainment. He was preserving evidence of what happens when prejudice meets talent and loses completely. What happened next would break more than just the internet. It would break Richard Pemberton's world entirely. But for Sophia, it was just the beginning of reclaiming everything she'd thought was lost forever. Comment, respect, if you believe everyone deserves to be seen for their true worth, regardless of their job or circumstances. Because this story proves that talent doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to remind the world what real greatness looks like. By sunrise, #SalsaJustice was trending worldwide. The video hit 3 million views before Richard Pemberton finished his first cup of coffee, and every refresh brought numbers that made his hands shake harder than his morning caffeine addiction ever had. CNN called Sophia's phone at 6:47 a.m. Good Morning America booked her for a live segment by 7:15. Ellen's production team reached out before 8 o'clock, and by noon, 3 major streaming services were pitching documentary deals. The quiet cook who'd been invisible for 3 years suddenly had the entire entertainment industry calling her name. But the real power wasn't in the celebrity attention. It was in the comments section, where thousands of people found their voices through Sophia's courage. Stories flooded in from every corner of the country, each one a testament to the universal experience of being underestimated, dismissed, reduced to nothing more than what people could see on the surface. A janitor from Detroit shared his story. "I have a PhD in engineering, but nobody sees past the mop." A server from Phoenix wrote, "I'm a published poet working doubles to pay student loans." A housekeeper from Miami revealed, "I was a surgeon in my home country. Here, I clean houses and dream of operating rooms." Each comment became a thread in a tapestry of hidden talent, buried dreams, and quiet dignity that society had trained itself not to see. Sophia's moment hadn't just gone viral. It had given permission for millions of invisible people to declare that they, too, deserved to be known for who they truly were. The business community moved with the swift brutality that only comes when money is on the line. Pemberton Holdings lost $47 million in contracts within 48 hours as corporate partners scrambled to distance themselves from Richard's recorded cruelty. The footage of him threatening to blacklist Sophia, of him betting against her dignity like she was a game piece, played on loop across business news networks. The board meeting lasted exactly 17 minutes. The vote was unanimous. Richard Pemberton was out. No golden parachute, no severance package, no face-saving resignation. Just a security escort to his corner office to pack his personal items, while his assistant fielded calls from reporters hungry for his side of a story that had no defensible angle. His country club membership was revoked by Thursday. His positions on 3 charity boards were terminated by Friday. The private school where he'd served on the alumni committee asked him to step down to protect the institution's reputation. In 72 hours, Richard discovered that respect built on fear and money could evaporate faster than morning dew. Victoria filed for divorce by the end of the week, her attorney citing irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. Even she couldn't survive the social exile that came with being married to the man who'd become Manhattan's most despised pariah. Meanwhile, Sophia's phone transformed from a quiet necessity into a symphony of opportunity. Dance studios across the country offered partnerships. Broadway producers pitched starring roles. Fitness companies wanted her to develop signature workout programs. Publishing houses competed to secure the rights to her autobiography. But the call that made her hands tremble came from Lincoln Center's artistic director at 3:22 on Wednesday afternoon. "Ms. Rivera-Castillo," the voice said with a kind of reverence usually reserved for returning royalty, "we'd like to welcome you home. The stage has been waiting for you." Professional dancers from around the world posted tribute videos, recreating her penthouse performance while sharing their own stories of resilience. #SalsaJustice spawned sister hashtags, #HiddenTalent, hashtag service workers deserve better, and hashtag respect everyone. Each tag became a movement, each movement became a community, each community became a voice that couldn't be silenced. This is what accountability looks like in the digital age. This is what happens when cruelty meets community, when prejudice faces the power of shared truth, when arrogance collides with the internet's infinite memory. But here's what breaks my heart. For every story like Sophia's that goes viral, thousands of others suffer in silence. How many talented people are invisible in your life right now? How many dreams are you walking past without seeing? How many Sophias are serving your coffee, cleaning your office, delivering your food, carrying brilliance you'll never know about because you never thought to ask? This story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror reflecting our collective blindness to the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Subscribe if you want to be part of the solution. Share if you believe everyone deserves to be seen for their full humanity. Comment, justice, if you think character should always triumph over cash accounts. The ripple effects extended far beyond Richard's personal destruction. Restaurants across Manhattan began sharing stories about their staff's hidden talents. A line cook at Daniel revealed he was a classical violinist. A busser at Le Bernardin turned out to be a published novelist. A bartender at the Plaza had competed in the Olympics 15 years earlier. Each revelation became its own viral moment, creating a cultural shift towards seeing service workers as complete human beings rather than background characters in wealthy people's stories. Tip amounts increased. Job applications began including space for other talents and experiences. Some restaurants started featuring staff spotlight nights, giving employees opportunities to showcase abilities that had nothing to do with carrying plates or mixing drinks. News outlets picked up the broader story, examining the hidden talent crisis in America, how economic necessity forced brilliant people into survival jobs while their gifts went unrecognized and unutilized. Sociology professors used Sophia's story in lectures about class consciousness and social invisibility. Business schools created case studies about the costs of workplace cruelty in the digital age. David Pemberton publicly apologized for his family's behavior and established a foundation supporting artists recovering from career-ending injuries. His first grant recipient was a former Broadway dancer working as a physical therapist who needed funding to return to performing after a 3-year recovery from spinal surgery. Times Square billboards featured Sophia's image alongside the words, "See everyone. Respect everyone." The campaign, funded by an anonymous donor later revealed to be David, sparked conversations in offices, schools, and dinner tables across America about who we overlook and why. But Richard's story wasn't finished. Stripped of his business empire and social standing, facing financial ruin as legal bills mounted from discrimination lawsuits filed by former employees, he had a choice to make. Would he double down on bitterness, or would he finally learn the lesson Sophia had tried to teach him on that marble floor? What Sophia did next surprised everyone, including herself. The woman who'd been humiliated in front of 200 cameras was about to do something that would define not just her comeback, but her character for generations to come. This is the power of community in the digital age. When we witness injustice and choose to amplify truth over silence. When we use our platforms to lift up instead of tear down. When we remember that everyone, absolutely everyone, has a story worth knowing, talent worth celebrating, and dignity worth protecting. The revolution that started with one dance was just beginning. Comment, collection, if you're ready for more stories that prove love wins, truth matters, and everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. 6 months later, the Bronx had a new jewel gleaming under the autumn sun, Rivera Dance Academy. The converted warehouse that had once stored forgotten furniture now pulsed with children's laughter and the irresistible rhythms of salsa, merengue, and bachata. Sophia moved between her students like sunlight breaking through clouds, teaching more than steps, teaching dignity, confidence, the transformative power of showing up as your authentic self. 12-year-old Maria spun with the same fearless joy Sophia had felt at that age, before the world taught her to make herself smaller. 8-year-old Carlos discovered he could tell stories with his body that his shy voice couldn't speak. Teenagers who'd never believed they were worth watching learned that stage presence comes from self-respect, not self-doubt. "Remember," Sophia called out as her advanced class practiced their routine, "the dance doesn't care how much money your parents make. It doesn't care where you live or what language you speak at home. It only cares that you show up with your whole heart." David arrived at 4:30 with coffee and business reports, their partnership having evolved into something neither had expected when this journey began. What started as his attempt to apologize for his family's cruelty had grown into genuine respect, then friendship, then something deeper that neither rushed to define. Love that began with moral courage had the strongest foundation of all. "The scholarship fund is fully endowed," he announced, settling beside her as students packed up their gear. "Every child who wants to dance can afford to dance." Sophia smiled, watching her students leave with the kind of confidence that would serve them far beyond any dance floor. "Your father would have hated this," she said, not with bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd turned cruelty into creativity. "6 months ago, yes," David replied. "But people can surprise you." The biggest surprise was yet to come. Lincoln Center's stage felt like returning to a home she'd thought was lost forever. The spotlights painted dreams in gold across the familiar floor where Sophia had once believed her career had ended. Tonight, she understood it had only been interrupted, waiting for her to remember that talent doesn't expire, it just hibernates until courage calls it back to life. The performance was flawless, but more than that, it was honest. She danced her story, the triumph, the tragedy, the years of invisibility, and the moment when hiding ended and truth began. Every movement spoke of resilience that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. When she took her final bow, the audience rose as one thunderous unit. But this wasn't just applause for her dancing, this was recognition of her journey, celebration of her courage, and acknowledgement that they were witnessing something sacred, a woman reclaiming everything that had been stolen from her. In the front row, a familiar face caught her eye. Richard Pemberton sat among the crowd, looking older, smaller, humbled by the consequences of his own actions. His applause was genuine, his tears real, his presence a statement that some people can learn from their mistakes, even when those lessons cost them everything they thought mattered. Later, backstage amid the flowers and congratulations, Richard approached with the hesitant steps of someone who knew he had no right to be there. "I came to apologize," he said simply, his voice stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him, "and to donate to your academy. Some lessons cost everything to learn, but they're worth every penny lost." Sophia looked at the man who'd tried to destroy her dignity and saw something she hadn't expected: genuine remorse. Not the calculated apology of someone trying to rehabilitate their image, but the real regret of someone who'd looked in the mirror and didn't like what they found. "Everyone deserves a second chance to do better," she replied, extending her hand. His handshake was different now, respectful, equal, human. The ripple effects continued expanding like circles on water. Restaurants across the city implemented hidden talent showcases. Service industry workers gained collective bargaining power they'd never possessed. 3 major companies changed their hiring practices to consider skills beyond formal education. Most importantly, children who looked like Sophia's students began to see themselves differently. They watched her story and understood that their current circumstances didn't define their ultimate possibilities. Dreams deferred weren't dreams denied. Sometimes they were just dreams waiting for the right moment to take flight. This story isn't ending, it's beginning. Every time you choose to see people's humanity over their circumstances, you're writing the next chapter. Every time you stand up instead of staying silent, you're changing the world in ways you'll never fully measure. But I need to be honest with you. While you've been watching this story unfold, somewhere someone like Sophia is being dismissed, underestimated, made invisible by people who think they know everything about someone based on their uniform or their accent or their address. Someone's dreams are being crushed by someone else's prejudice right now, this very moment. Your subscription isn't just support, it's a statement that you believe in dignity over dollars, character over cash accounts, truth over appearances. That you're tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones, and you're ready to be part of the solution. Subscribe like your conscience depends on it. Share this story like someone's life depends on seeing it. Because somewhere, someone needs to know that talent doesn't care about your bank account, dignity can't be stolen by circumstances, and respect is always earned through character, never bought through privilege. This is about every second chance, every comeback story, every moment when we choose growth over grudges. This is proof that people can change, communities can heal, and dignity always finds a way to dance. Stories like this don't just entertain, they transform. They remind us that everyone has hidden depths, that respect can't be purchased, and that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's terrifying. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or inspired you to see others differently, then you're exactly the kind of person I write these stories for. I've been collecting narratives like this, tales of hidden strength, unexpected justice, and human dignity that triumph over prejudice, in my exclusive SoulThread Stories collection.